Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. On the episode today, we have Dr. Terri Bacow. Dr. Bacow, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, I am a clinical psychologist in New York City in the United States, and I have a private practice where I see clients with anxiety disorders, as well as depression, ADHD, relationship issues, etc. And I've written a book called Goodbye Anxiety, a guided journal for overcoming worry, and it is written with younger individuals in mind. It's really targeted toward adolescents and young adults, but many of my adult clients find it to be really helpful. And it just involves really concrete strategies for overcoming worry, a preoccupation, a rumination, and all of those symptoms.
Thank you for the introduction. The first question I wanted to ask you was, why did you choose anxiety?
Well, I think the number one reason is that it is so incredibly common. Anxiety is the most widely diagnosed of all the psychiatric disorders, and the rates of it have doubled since the pandemic. So it's just a really prevalent condition that so many of us struggle with.
When you talk to people in your practice, what have you found the main issues to be in relation to anxiety?
Well, almost all of my clients do have anxiety disorders, and a lot of them are reporting stress and burnout. And I see also a lot of parents in my practice, a lot of moms and dads, and hearing a lot about parenting burnout in particular. Moms that are overwhelmed and really tired, especially after the pandemic. Of my younger clients, I think they're reporting things like dating stress, academic issues in college, job stress. Those are the things that come up.
Okay. And this is the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. So what is the age group that would benefit from the book?
The teenagers, really, teenagers and college students and young adults. But for parents, I think it's good for them to know that this book is a giftable book. It's meant to be given. Really attractive to look at and buy it, but I think it's a good looking book, and it's disarming. So I think that you could easily give it to a teenage child and have them not freak out.
So this brings me nicely to the next question, which is, how do we know if kids are displaying an excess of worry that meets the criteria to be anxiety?
Great question. I think that healthy worry is proportional to the situation. If you have a test coming up, if you have a job interview, and you're a little bit anxious, it's appropriate. Whereas anxiety is more pervasive, it's more chronic, it's ongoing. Healthy worry is temporary. Clinical anxiety is more persistent, and it's not always proportional to the situation. When we have anxiety, we're typically overreacting, we are overthinking, we are catastrophizing, and then it becomes a problem.
The way I was trying to get my head around the next question was, if you were a parent and you wanted to help your child with anxiety, would you just gift them the book, or would you attempt to help them through it? Would you guide them through it? How would you go about that?
That's a great question. I think that self-help is not a replacement for counseling, but it could be really great if your child is resistant to counseling, if your child doesn't really want to see a therapist. I mean, I still think we can push or we could try to get them to go, but I think giving the book is a good first step, because it will give your child information, and the book can be read in a private way. No one needs to know. It has some journaling exercises that they can write in. But I think ultimately, if you have an anxious child, you do want them to see a counselor, and you want to try to overcome that resistance. And I think it depends on your parenting style. But I'm a really big fan of being warm but firm, making an appointment to go to this appointment.
Good point. And in your experience, what have been the common misconceptions that parents have about the topic of anxiety?
So I think that as it comes with all sorts of mental illness, there's a stigma that comes along with that, kind of this misguided notion that if you're anxious, you're weak, or maybe you can't be counted on, or that you're not going to function well. But there's so many folks with what we call high functioning anxiety that function really well, that are highly successful, that have compensatory strategies and do really well. So I think that we really need to remove the stigma, because the other piece is that anxiety is genetic. It runs in families, it's biological. It's not a choice and it's not weakness, it's just hereditary.
How much would you say is hereditary, and how much would you say is what's the word I'm looking for? Upbringing.
I don't know the scientists to figure that out. You know, we have the nature nurture debate, and in psychology we talk about the biopsychosocial model, which is that it's an integration, it's a combination. And typically what happens is you have a genetic predisposition towards anxiety, and then something happens, like a traumatic event or a catalyst, like a move or a change of school, or even puberty can bring out anxiety. And the interaction between the predisposition you have and an environmental event or stressor can bring anxiety up.
Do you have a definition that you work with of what is anxiety?
Sure, I could really best sum it up as an overestimation of the likelihood of danger and an underestimation of our ability to cope.
It's a great definition. Thank you.
Welcome.
In the book, there is something called breaking the worry cycle. How would you describe that?
Well, that stems from a particular approach that I take, that many psychologists treating anxiety take, called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. A CBT is the gold standard for treating anxiety disorders, and it's based on a three-part model that we kind of consider a cycle, which is that an anxious thought leads to an anxious feeling, which leads to an anxious behavior or an action. And that when you have a worried thought and you feel really worried, then maybe you avoid a situation, that will then solidify and reinforce your concern, and it keeps the cycle going. So in order to break the worry cycle, we need to either change the thought or change the behavior, and that will change the feeling.
Interesting. In the book, you use the term catharsis, and I had never heard that term before. So for others, can you share what that is?
Yes, so catharsis is pretty much venting. It's expressing thoughts and feelings. It's not healthy to keep these thoughts and feelings to ourselves. It could be such a heavy burden. In contrast, it's much better to air these things out. And you could do that by talking to a friend, a family member, or to a counselor, or by journaling. And journaling offers a private, inexpensive, pretty much free forum to express your personal truth in a really, like I said, cathartic way. It's really liberating to get these thoughts out of your mind and onto paper.
I liked the part about the mind being like an internet browser, multiple concerns happening simultaneously. What made you think of that?
Well, I was trying to find metaphors, ways of explaining things that would be understandable and relatable to the younger generation, as well as the current one. I think we could all relate to the idea of the mind as an internet browser with all these tabs open, and then you hear the music. It just sort of mirrors the experience of anxiety, which is that it's overwhelming, and we need to kind of close those tabs. And I also think the metaphor is useful when we think about the thoughts that come into our mind. We have so many thoughts. We have 60,000 thoughts in a given day. So I kind of like to ask my patient, which of all the thoughts you're having, which one is trending the most right now?
And what would you do then after that?
Well, I think that question is designed to elicit what we call an automatic thought. A lot of times when we're worried, it's a stream of consciousness. We're not really aware of sort of the soundtrack of our mind. But in order to do CBT, which is the therapy that I mentioned before, we need to really identify a specific concern, a particular thought or interpretation that we're having about a situation in order to examine it and challenge it.
Great point. You also mentioned the inner critic. Would you describe what the inner critic is? And then also follow up to that is, can it ever be useful?
Well, the problem is that we are really accustomed to criticizing ourselves. And I think we believe that criticizing ourselves is going to motivate us to take action, to do something differently. But what the science has found is that self-compassion is more effective than self-criticism in motivating behavior change. It's really, it promotes resilience, it promotes active coping. And when we criticize ourselves, quite honestly, it just makes us feel really badly. So I think the inner critic isn't really that helpful, but I think we believe that it is. We believe that if we are hard on ourselves, if we really push ourselves, and we got really angry with ourselves for our mistakes, that it will, that will do better. It just doesn't really work that way.
Thank you for that. I'm going to have to change a little bit myself. I'm asking questions for myself here. So there's another good phrase in the book, and it is the worry triangle. What is that?
The worry triangle is what I was mentioning earlier in our conversation, the cycle of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The three-component model, which is a thought leads to a feeling, which leads to a behavior, and this cycle could be dysfunctional. And so we want to break the worry triangle by modifying our thoughts and our behavior. So what that might look like is, if you're having a worry thought about maybe I'm going to fail this test, you've got to ask yourself, wait a minute, what's the actual likelihood that I'm going to fail this test? I've studied for 5 hours. This is really unlikely. And you also want to change your behavior. If you are avoiding things, if you're canceling plans, if you're overcompensating, those behaviors can make anxiety worse. And we want to, instead of avoid, we want to approach the situation and realize it's not so bad. So again, the worry triangle, the way we break that is changing the thinking and changing the behavior.
Some people talk about facing their fears. Is there any distinction you would make between that and the worry triangle?
Sure. So facing your fears is exactly what we mean by behavior change. The opposite of avoidance is approach. And psychologists call this exposure therapy, which is facing your fears, realizing that it's not going to be as bad as you anticipate. Now, when we avoid, we get this immediate sense of relief. Oh my God, I didn't have to do that. But then when we have to do it again, we feel even more scared because of the memory of escape. In contrast, if you enter a feared situation, if you do the thing that you're scared of, you might get a little peak. But then as time goes on, the anxiety is going to come down because the situation would never be as bad as you think.
Thank you for that. There was one thing I liked, which was when you mentioned talking back to worry. The question I have is, how can we remember to do it?
Well, talking back to worry is a form of self-talk. And I really encourage people to talk to themselves. I mean, you can do it out loud, but I would really recommend quietly to yourself, talk back to your worry, to stand up to it. And I think sometimes it's good to recognize worry as a separate entity, to think of worry almost as a third party, to even give it a name, and then to kind of get annoyed with it and say, my anxiety is acting up today. I am going to talk back to it. I'm going to tell it to leave me alone. And the important part of this is to recognize that your anxiety is separate from you, that we can have emotion, but that we don't need to identify with those emotions.
Do you do it yourself?
Of course. I mean, I think I wrote in the book, I am an anxious person. I think it was a great source of inspiration for me. I mean, it certainly doesn't interfere with my work, but I think it helped me really relate to clients of what they're going through, and I could recognize a lot of what they're saying, and I think it helped me invite them better.
And the last one that I've got from my list is there ever necessary worrying?
So when I wrote about necessary worrying in my book, I was really talking about the beliefs that we have that are quite often mistaken, that we need to worry in order to be productive. A lot of us really believe that worry in a superstitious way will help us get things done or protect us from danger. And it's really about control. And so a lot of what I advise my clients is you do not need worrying. If you let go of it, nothing bad is going to happen. You're still going to be productive. In fact, you're going to be even more productive. So I encourage clients to almost reject their worry, not really suppress it or try to get rid of it, but more learn to manage it and to really let go of their beliefs about the utility of worrying. Because what's worrying good for? Absolutely nothing.
Well, I think that as a result of our conversation, I think parents would be, let's say, better prepared to deal with a child with anxiety. So thank you for that. Are you proud that you became an author?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I am. I am going to a conference this weekend, a behavior therapy conference. I'm really excited to talk about my book. Sometimes I forget that it's an accomplishment, but I am proud. It's something I've always wanted to do. It's a bucket list kind of, I guess, achievement. And most of all, I really would love to help people. I know that's a cheesy thing to say, but I genuinely hope that the book reaches the young people that are suffering from anxiety, which is so many of us, that it gives them some relief.
Yeah, it's a great topic. So thank you for writing about it. How long did it take, start to finish, to write?
Well, I was in a conversation with the publisher during lockdown, during the spring of 2020. And I think parents would appreciate knowing that I was writing the book proposal while trying to homeschool 2 children. So I had one child in preschool, one in elementary, running away from their Zooms, not really wanting to do school. And I was having to be on top of them, write the book proposal, and do all my work. So that was a fun time. But in terms of the timeline, I would say I began writing in the summer of 2020, and the book was finished in the fall of 2020. And then there were a lot of edits that happened, and it was published in December of 2021.
Okay. And did you enjoy it?
I really enjoy writing. I didn't enjoy having to, do it while the pandemic was happening because there was so much other stress that was going on. But notwithstanding that, I really enjoy writing about anxiety, teaching about it, talking about it. So in that way, it was enjoyable.
Good. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
I don't think so, but I think that parents should really know that they're not alone, that a lot of our kids are anxious, that this is almost an epidemic. And I think that there are resources out there that could help parents helps their kids with anxiety. This is one of them.
Well, for those who are interested in buying the book, where do they go?
They could go to Amazon, certainly the independent booksellers as well. And in the United States, we have a store, Barnes and Noble, and it's in the United States, in the store at Barnes and Noble and Urban Outfitters. But I think the easiest way, I don't want to influence anyone, is Amazon, because, you know, 2 days later, you can have it.
Well, thank you again. I think it's very worthwhile work. Dr. Bacow, thanks for being a great guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.